Teachers in the Los Angeles Unified School District have gone on strike. This is the first strike in 30 years, and they have very specific demands as part of this strike. But the main thing that they want to focus on is smaller class sizes and more support staff. Now, of course, they are also asking for better pay, but one of the things that they are really struggling with is these giant class sizes and the lack of support staff. For instance, in many of these schools, there is no full-time nurse. There will be a nurse maybe one day out of the week. And in response to these demands, the district has offered full-time nurses for 1 year. Who knows what happens after that year is over. But the LA Unified is offering 6% spread out over the first 2 years of a 3-year deal. The union wants 6.5% all at once, retroactive a year earlier. So again, this is about the timing. How long would these changes last? Would they eventually change course and go back to bigger class sizes, less pay? Those are all issues that led to these teachers deciding to walk out. The negotiations did not come to an agreement.
So I don't want you to get lost in the details of 6 or 6.5%. Let's talk about why the strike's happening in the first place. So this was not a close issue. The teachers voted on a strike. You know what percentage voted yes? 98%. And they were absolutely right. If they didn't threaten a strike, they wouldn't have gotten the 6% offer in the first place. And they wouldn't have gotten any concessions in the first place. So you know how many kids in LA the high schools have per class? 39 to 42. 40 kids in a class. Some have all the way up to 50. How are you supposed to teach kids? The best you can do is maintain order in the short amount of time that you have to house those kids. So of course, not having nurses. So my kid's in a public school in LA. So both my kids are. So this directly affects us. I'm gonna talk about how it directly affects my family in the post game. So please check that out, tyt.com/join to become a member. And I'll explain to you the hardships, etc., and all the stuff that we go through. I'll give you one small example here, the nurses that Anna talked about, right? So my son had to get antibiotics. They're like, sorry, in our case, the parents pay extra for the nurse to show up 2 days a week instead of 1 day a week. But they're like, the other 3 days that your kid has to take antibiotics, he's gotta do it on his own. He was 6, he's 6. They're like, no, we don't have a nurse. And it would create a liability issue to have anybody else do it, right? Do you know what percentage of the kids in the LA public school districts are on lunch assistance? Meaning either they get a free lunch or some portion of their lunch is paid because they're too poor. Now look, think about it in your neck of the woods, you might think, well, if it's 20%, well that's a big number, man. 20% of the district is so poor they need lunch assistance. In LA, the second largest city in the country, the number is 80%. 80% of the kids that go to public school are so poor they need assistance in paying for lunch. So what happened? And this is exactly what the heart of the strike is about. What happened was, slowly they started giving so-called choice, and wealthy people started withdrawing their kids from the public schools and putting them into private schools. And I understand their motivations and I'm not blaming them, but it created a vicious cycle so that then the public schools had less and less money, and the wealthy, who honestly are the biggest donors and control politics more than anyone else, even in the liberal state of California, it's still true, okay? And what do they have? Well, they're like, well, I'm paying a ton for private school. You know how much private school in LA is? $40,000 a year per student, okay? And you got a couple of kids, how are you gonna afford that? How could anyone afford that? So now if you're one of the wealthier parents or even like upper middle class or something, you're like, well, I'm paying $40,000 a year, I got 2 kids, I'm paying $80,000, right? And then you want me to pay for the public schools. No, they have enough, right? And then the government bleeds the public schools dry until only the very poor are left in the public schools. Then they turn around and go, you see the public schools aren't doing well, that's why we need more charter schools. And we need to privatize education more. And that is how they've crushed public education in California and in Los Angeles. And now when the teachers strike, goddamn right they should strike. And so we have been too timid for too long. Absolutely, they should have done a strike way earlier. And all of your states should strike for the teachers. They did it in the red states, they did it in West Virginia, they did it in Oklahoma, they did it in all these places, and they all got raises. You know why? Because until you strike, they don't give you a raise. They're gonna keep taking the money and give it in tax cuts for the rich, which is what they did in Kansas, which is what they did in all those red states. And then, they go, oh, sorry, no money left for your kids. So, haha, sad day for you. It's okay, our kids are in private schools, so you guys fend for yourself.
So public education has been dismantled throughout the country, but dismantling public education in California actually started in the late 1970s through a ballot measure to cap property taxes. So in, I believe it was 1978, Prop 13, which passed with overwhelming support among voters, capped property taxes at about 1% of the value of homes. And property taxes are used to fund public education. And so the LAUSD in particular went from being one of the top school districts in the country to now one of the worst school districts in the country, because you take the funding out, you take the resources out of the education system, and of course it's not gonna do well. So it started that way. And that was one of the factors that convinced some of the wealthier Angelenos to take their children out of public schools and into private schools. So then that happens, but what's recently happened within the LAUSD is you have administrators who have absolutely no experience in education filling top level administrative roles, and their ideology is that public education should be dismantled. So I'll give you an example of that. LAUSD Superintendent Austin Beaudry, there are ways to educate kids that don't rely on a physical body. Meaning you can educate kids, you don't need a person to educate them. Maybe we can put them in front of a computer and they can figure it out themselves. That's the superintendent in the LAUSD.
No, he's exactly the problem, okay? So implicit in what he's saying there is he's threatening the teachers, I'll fire you all and teach the kids with computers, okay? And Beutner is a guy who is pushing for charter schools and saying, no, we need to take more money out of the public school system. Now, why is he the superintendent? How did that happen? Because the private school industrial complex, and especially the charter schools, they fund these people to go into politics to become superintendents and other positions in education at the local level. They're in the bag. I mean, this is the insanity of money in politics. So they give them money. Did you guys give money to Beutner's opponent? Of course not. You didn't know who Beutner's opponent was. There was no lobbying campaign for his opponent, because his opponent in the election might have actually represented you and your kids. But Austin Beutner got a ton of money, he's fine. Why? Because he was put into that position to dismantle our public schools. Right. And now, ironically, Republicans turn around and go, oh, well, you see that? Oh, well, it's a blue state and you guys still have these problems. It's your fault for being liberals. No, Ronald Reagan, as governor of California, began to dismantle public education in California. That was a Republican proposal. Prop 13, which absolutely destroyed it, was a Republican proposal. So is it on us now to fix it? Yes. So Gavin Newsom and every other public official should be going out of their way. They should give the teachers more than they asked for. And what I love about these teacher strikes all across the country is they're not just saying, give me a pay raise. They're saying, for God's sake, look after the students. So the nurses and the librarians that they're asking for doesn't affect the teachers, it affects the students. And they're saying, for God's sake, look, they're putting 39 to 42 kids in a classroom. That doesn't just affect me, it affects the students more. Look out for the students. Have decent funding in these schools. And so yes, it's on Democrats to fix it now. And it's also on us to fix the entire system. Because as long as all these positions are chosen in elections, and in elections you're allowed to give private financing, of course, every industry that's affected by any election will go purchase these elections that nobody else is paying attention to and put their guy in charge to destroy what we have.
Finally, in an op-ed in Forbes, Peter Green, who was an educator for 33 years, perfectly summed up what's happening to LAUSD, and I believe this is true of school districts throughout the country as well. He said, quote, increasingly the agenda of many people taking positions of authority over public education is to dismantle public education and replace it with a network of private charter schools, a process often accelerated by starving public schools for funding in order to manufacture manufacture a crisis. And this is a very common strategy by those who want a free market involved in every facet of life. They essentially drain the funding and the resources from something that is publicly funded. And then once that entity begins to fail, they'll point to it and say, see, the government can't do anything right. The government can't do anything right. We need to privatize everything. It all needs to be run by the free market. And
that's the exact same strategy they had for the post office. They've run this game over and over and over again. One more thing, we had wonderfully progressive policies in this country for a long time. People think, oh no, it's not possible, etc. That's not remotely true. For example, do you know FDR was fighting for universal health care all the way back in the day? And I can go on and on. But we've also had disastrous policies in this country. We've already tried these things when you try free market extremism. So for example, we used to have private fire departments in this country. Yeah, you know why we stopped that? Because then they would only put out the fire in your house, but then the fire would spread and destroy your house anyway. Some things need to be public. You can't have a private police. You can't have private fire departments because then you have massive injustice, okay? The same for the schools. We used to have a system that was totally free market. And you know what happened? The lords and the nobility in different places like the UK and other empires, but also here in America, the elite would just hire someone to come in and teach their kids in their homes. And everyone else couldn't afford it, so they wouldn't get education. And the elites love that because then they have a permanent advantage. And their kids will always rule over your kids because your kids never got a chance in the first place. That's what they want to return to. That's what they're in the middle of returning to. Absolutely right to strike. They should strike more and more all across the country when it comes to this issue. So I'm 100% with the teachers. Two easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.